will be meeting with the governor as well as possibly the mayor of Houston. And as that happens, we'll bring it to you live. All right, let's bring in now our political panel to discuss this visit. All about to get underway. Alice Stewart is a CNN political commentator and a Republican strategist. Michael Nutter is a CNN political contributor and former mayor of Philadelphia. Good to see both of you. Alice, let me begin with you.
Thank you, Frederica. Because
the president was in Texas inside this week following the devastation of Hurricane Harvey. And there were some who have been praising the fact that he is already requesting nearly $8 billion for immediate relief. At the same time, he's also being criticized by some for not showing enough empathy for the victims. How important is it for a president to be able to do both, get the business at hand of helping to bring aid to victims and at the same time being kind of, the comforter in chief?
It is important to have a well-rounded approach to this. But look, I was one of the biggest supporters of the president's first visit to Texas because it was important. He didn't go to the area where there's rescue and recovery going on. He went to see what needed to be done there and see what kind of aid they needed. I have a relative who was at the emergency shelter where the president did go and said that the workers there needed to see him there, and they were encouraged by his visit because that showed them that yes, he is committed and he is going to follow through on what needs to get done. And also, the vice president's visit this week was important in that he was compassionate to people there and was able to visit with them. But I think the visit today by the president will be an opportunity, as they have said, to visit with the storm survivors and show the compassion that some people wanted to see. But more than anything, there is a time for action, which he showed earlier this week, and today is a time for him to actually get in there and speak with some people who are personally affected by that. And I think both visits are exactly what the president needed to be doing.
And Michael, we're seeing Air Force One land right now at Ellington Field, Joint Reserve Base near Houston. So what are your thoughts on the expectations of a president, particularly when you have a natural disaster like this and they visit the area? How important is it, and who should the president be visiting with?
Right. Well, Frederica, it's tremendously important how the president, how a governor, how a mayor deals with any of these kind of disastrous situations. And certainly for the president, when you look at, and you made reference to the past, whether it's President Obama, President George Bush, 43, and certainly President Clinton, those three presidents in a row, I think, demonstrated or had to demonstrate, unfortunately, numerous times, the consoler-in-chief side of the job. And so it is a balancing act. There's the consoling part. There is the action part. His first visit was his first visit. I mean, I don't want to get too much into personalities. I mean, I'm not sure that Donald Trump has a whole lot of empathy within him. That's not really been demonstrated. But put that to the side. He is there. He is the president. It's very important that he meet with, of course, the elected officials, the folks who are doing the work on the ground, get as many updates as possible, find out what he and the federal government can do. I can talk about some of that in a second. But it's also important to meet the volunteers and the real people who have been devastated by this incredible storm. And whether it's folks who have lost loved ones, who are still looking for loved ones, if that's the case, or people who have just literally lost everything. Yeah. Being on the ground, literally being where they are, to talk to them, to hold them, to console them, to say a word. And especially for the children and our seniors who are vulnerable, that is critically important. And so I think that the significance of this visit is very, very high and will set the stage for what happens next week. And I hope that Congress acts swiftly. I communicated with Mayor Turner just yesterday. They need 100% reimbursement. They need funds on the ground right now to start moving debris. They need more FEMA resources and all that the federal government can bring. And so Congress should not mess around with this. It would not take a rocket scientist to figure out that Texas and parts of Louisiana and other parts of the country have been devastated. This is not the time for politics. This is a time for people to act with empathy, seriousness, and get the job done.
And so, Alice, Congress, when they get back on Tuesday, they'll be seriously considering pouring over this nearly $8 billion, aid package. In addition to the president meeting with, congressional delegation today and city officials and even victims, we heard as early as yesterday, Congressman Al Green, who had some criticism saying access is really important. Open lines of communication, really important. It can't just be the handshake or the meeting today, but there has to be a continued relationship that's embarked between the president and these local officials and congressional delegates. How much pressure will there be on this president, and how important will it be that when the mayor picks up the phone and calls the president about anything that the city needs, that they're able to do that as opposed to, waiting for the president to reach out to them?
What we're seeing already, Fred, is great coordination between FEMA and the local officials. And we're hearing that more and more every day from people in Texas and now in Louisiana. And one thing that people in Texas should be comforted by is that reassurances by FEMA that they're not just going to be there this week and the next month. They're planning already to be there for many years to come in the vital rebuilding effort. And they understand this is going to be a long-term commitment by the federal government in order to get them back to what will be the new normal there in Houston. And that is reassuring words for people there on the ground. And we heard repeatedly from the governor there in Texas that the president has been extremely hands-on and extremely committed to making sure they get the resources that they need, whether it's personnel, whether it's troops to help rescue people, whether it's water or meals ready to eat. He says that the president has been very involved. And there was a New York Times article earlier this week where they talked about the president normally skims over details, but he's really delving in the case of Hurricane Harvey because he has seen the devastation and wants to provide the necessary funds. And the $8 billion request from the Trump administration is much higher than was originally discussed because he knows of the vast amount of work that needs to be done, not just now, but long term. So he is clearly demonstrating his commitment to making sure they have the resources and manpower they need there.
And Michael, nobody wants politics to stand in the way, especially as you look at the immediate need for people right now who have either lost everything. 80% of those impacted do not have flood insurance. They might get that $30,000, and some change from FEMA to assist, but they're going to need a lot more financial aid in order to, restart their lives and perhaps even relocate. But then you've got lawmakers who say, wait a minute, particularly in the Northeast, hey, when Sandy, came through New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, there were lawmakers in Texas that said no, or, put obstacles in the way before they were able to get assistance. And now members in that, tri-state area are now saying, wait a minute, is this going to be, hypocrisy that many of these Texas lawmakers want the same kind of aid, immediate aid, that Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York wanted? How is this likely to play out in your view?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to encourage my, I guess I'm a former elected official, but my, political colleagues in the Northeast. This is not the time, in my view, for payback. The citizens of Texas have nothing to do, ultimately, with what their elected officials do or don't do in Washington, D.C. So that will be very bad. Second, this is not about politics. It really is also, though, about policy. Alice made reference to the president finally focusing on some details. I mean, that's a nice pat on the back, but this is a detailed job. The other detail, though, is that the president rolled back the federal flood risk management standard about 10 days before Harvey hit. You can read that in the New York Times and a number of other publications, which will result in areas being rebuilt to a lower standard than the already low standards for flood mitigation in the first place. That's a policy mistake. And so if the president wants to focus on details, he really should take a second look at the federal flood risk management standard that he just rolled back. That was, of course, under President Obama. And since he's focused on repealing everything that President Obama did, he might want to rethink that particular strategy because you will waste hundreds of millions of dollars rebuilding to standards that already will not meet the current 100-year flood standard. And we know from climate change that these storms will be worse and more intense. And so this is a policy issue going forward that I hope the president and his administration focus on. But they need to get money on the ground now, working with Mayor Turner, working with Mayor Landrieu over in New Orleans, working with the mayor in Beaumont, and the many other cities and towns that have been devastated through this. So it's no time for politics. It is time for policy. It is time for action. We can't do anything about what people did or didn't do during the course of Hurricane Sandy. This is about Harvey right now and about storms that will come in the future. Get those folks the money and the resources they need right now. No nonsense.
And there's the president and the first lady, and coming off Air Force One right now. In a much more casual attire as they embark on their whirlwind tour of Texas and Louisiana today. Also joining us in the conversation as we look at these live pictures, having an idea about what the day may bring for the president and first lady. General Russell Honore with us, as well as Athena Jones, White House correspondent who is already on the ground there in Houston. So General Honore, I'd love to get your perspective on whether you believe this kind of trip, which may be a little different from the trip early in the week by the president and first lady, because they'll be meeting with flood victims and seeing, up close and personal the devastation, whether this will be a real reality check. You heard former mayor of Philadelphia, Michael Nutter, talk about the rollbacks of this president on the flood risk management standards. We know he has proposed, cuts for FEMA and the EPA, but now he's going to see what natural disasters do. Do you believe this will be a reality check for him as he embarks on policy, on what he backs in terms of policy changes moving forward?
Absolutely. In the first week here, and it continues today, to search and rescue and keeping people alive, as the governor of Texas said many times, the priority number one. When they get in that car, and I've laid witness to this personally, 12 years ago, the big ask will be coming. It will be replace the dams. If the governor don't ask for it, shame on him. He should ask for them. The other one's going to be FEMA compliance. You've had floods here before. If you're a poor person and you got a grant from FEMA to go back into your home, and now that you've flooded again, when you got that last grant, FEMA gave you 3 years of flood insurance. If you did not comply with that and maintain that flood insurance, and they come back and you flood it again, they will not give you anything. That is called a compliance order written in there as an incentive by Congress for people to maintain the insurance. The problem is poor people can't maintain the insurance because it's too expensive. That being said, that standard should be waived because a lot of these people have recently been flooded as recently as 3 or 4 years ago. The next thing I'm sure he's going to ask for is debris percentage. The percentage allowed by the regulations is 75%. I'm sure the governor is going to be asking them to raise that to 95%, if not 100% compliant, as he did in Louisiana last year for the flood. I'm sure the governor and the mayor should be asking for a drainage system for Houston. This is the third mayor that have addressed this with the administration, and they're only here for 2 years, and they've never gotten this resolved. And we see what happened without a proper drainage system for this town, that it becomes paralyzed, and it is the center of our energy industry. The other thing I would hope that they would ask the president is to go ahead and approve the Clean Safe Plant Act. It was written because of what happened in West Texas, when first the local responders didn't know what was going on in that plant, and that plant destroyed that community. The previous administration created that policy, and just in the last month, EPA put that policy on hold. It would have forced plants like this one in Crosby to inform local first responders what was in the plant and what they were to do if the plant caught fire. Guess what? That plant's on fire right now. That plant was built in a flood zone. That plant should have never been put there. The EPA and the Corps engineers approved that plant going into The area where it is, now it's flooded, it's under 6 foot of water, and we've got a mess on our hands. Hopefully they'll ask the president to tell the EPA and the Corps engineers to stop approving plants in wetlands. As Mr. Nutter said earlier, we need to stop putting plants and refineries inside of wetlands, because as the sea rise and we have these strong storms, they could have catastrophic event. The water in Houston has been declared toxic because of the amount of chemicals that's in it, and people are told to stay out of it because of this toxic stew that's been created, because so many of these plants are right in the wetlands. You go to Louisiana at the Sabine Pass, there's a plant there called Cheniere. The elevation in Cheniere at Sabine Pass is 3 foot elevation. That's an $18 billion plant. The state of Louisiana gave them $4 billion to build it, and they put it in a flood zone. The storm surge in Sabine Pass was 7 feet. Guess what happened? That plant floods. That's a lot of taxpayers' money went invested to build that plant, and now it's underwater. We got to stop building in the flood zone these plants and these dangerous refineries that we need for our national infrastructure, but we've got to keep them out of the wetlands, Fred. And hopefully they will discuss and ask the president to adjust those laws and enforce them.
And so it's the short-term need that needs to be met by assistance that is requested to the federal government, and it's the long-term plan as well. Athena Jones, a White House correspondent, is also joining us now. She is already in Houston on the ground there with a look at the high waters behind you, Athena. And so the president and the first lady have just arrived. They are now